Kia ora team, welcome back to The Distant Veil. My name's Harry, I'm one of the painters here at the studio, and what we're going to be going through today is a bit of a step-by-step walkthrough on how I've started to paint some of the Spartan minis from Mantic's Halo Flashpoint. Now, full disclosure, they did send us through a box of minis, so we did get the full Recon sort of starter set. In the box comes 8 minis, 2 copies each of 4 different poses. I'll be walking through the Spartan Mk VII armor. Now, I'm not too familiar with these armor variants. I kind of tapped out of Halo at Halo 3, where it peaked in my opinion. But I'm looking forward to getting back into the game and having an excuse to get back into the lore, looking at the minis. It's going to get me excited to get back on the Xbox. Now, for today's painting, you're going to need the following paints to paint it like I did, or at least your nearest match. For the armor, you're going to need Imperial Navy, a Crystal Blue, the Hyper Armor Speed Paint, and Pano Blue. For the under armor, you're going to need a matte black, an Eshin Grey from Citadel, and Uniform Grey. For the weapons, we're going to need Eshin Grey, Grim Black Speed Paint, and Uniform Grey for highlights. For the leathers, we're going to need Spec Ops Brown from the Army Painter, Mahogany from the Vallejo Air range, and Tan Earth from the Vallejo Model Color range. And finally, for the glow effect on the visor, we're going to need a matte white. I'm using the Army Painter's one, and we're going to use Glory Glow from the Army Painter as an effect paint. Right, and with that, let's get started. So what we're starting with is a sort of all-over airbrush of Imperial Navy over a matte black primer. The goal here is not necessarily to cover the model 100%, leaving on maybe a little bit of the black in the shadow, but we're not attempting to do anything fancy with the paint, just getting it on the model. Because the next step to add a bit of a punch is going to be applying a white ink from a zenithal angle, so up nice and high, kind of cover the high points with the ink. And then once we've got that sort of highlight established, we're going to come back through and retint that white with some crystal blue, and that's going to help to just bring a nice poppy blue, but it will look a little desaturated to start with. That's okay, because we're going to be resaturating that paint in the next step. Right, so to resaturate the paint, we're going to take that Hyper Power Speed Paint from the Army Painter, and we're going to use this to block in the areas of the armor that we want to be blue, and trying to leave the other areas of the model just as they are. We will be covering this back over in the next step, but we want to really use the speed paint now to establish some saturation and some blocking in of who we want to have the final blue. Now, what you'll probably find is that putting on especially this Hyper Power Speed Paint over the desaturated blue, initially while it's wet looks fantastic, and then as it dries it's going to lose a little bit of that punch. Don't worry, trust the process. When we come back through and start blocking in some black, by comparison it's going to look a lot more heavily saturated blue. Now if you don't have this specific speed paint from the Army Painter, any rich blue or vivid blue speed paint or contrast paint or express color paint from Vallejo that is in this sort of rich blue family will do the job quite well. Right, now that we've roughed in the saturated blue, we're going to come in with the matte black and start blocking in the sort of undersuit or black accent components of the armor. Now, looking at a few images from the Halo Infinity games, or Halo Infinite game, sometimes the shins are left black, same as the sort of second tone, Sometimes they're left coloured the same as the rest of the armour. I don't think either one is particularly correct. As far as I'm concerned, all colours of Halo armour are technically lore accurate. But to add a bit of variety, I've decided to go with black fins on my guys. And again, the brand of black paint doesn't matter too much, as long as it's a matte black. The next step we want to paint here is the weapon and the belt around the hips. I've decided to not colour that the same as the armour, just to help break up the model a little bit. I'm just using Eshin Grey here, but any sort of blue-grey that's relatively cool should work pretty well. The speed paint that we'll be using to cover this up later on will hide a lot of the colour, but I want it to have a different quality of sort of gunmetal black as compared to the undersuit on the armour. Right, next thing we want to paint in the leather. So to get the brown colour established, I'm using Spec Ops Brown, but any sort of warm-ish brown that's on the darker end of the spectrum will work. We will be highlighting and then retinting with other browns down the track, but as long as we can get some decent colour established just to start with, it makes it easy to do the other work later on down the track. Cool, and with that we've roughed in most of the base colors on the model. So the next thing from here is to start to edge highlight. If you've ever painted Space Marines, you'll be very familiar with this method of systematically going through and edge highlighting most of the raised edges. Now, because this armor and the sculpt itself is a little smoother than something like from Games Workshop, it means we have to be a little bit more careful about painting in the details like an edge highlight, but it also means it's a little bit more forgiving. You can make it as detailed or as under detailed as you want. So for this sort of first edge highlight, I'm aiming to cover maybe about a quarter of each upraised edge, and any other edge that just sort of captures my fancy as something I want to add a little bit of shape or detail to the model in that area around. So knee pads, elbows, things that are maybe a little bit lower down that I want to draw attention to will help to define. Those are the things I want to be looking at painting in now. Crystal blue highlight, you can come back through with a pan O as a sort of fine highlight, so a lot smaller coverage in terms of area, and just going with the very finest points to add the final layer of definition. Right, next step, we're going to start edging in on that sort of second tone, the black around the armor. So same as the blue, aiming for about a 1/4 coverage of each of those sort of more interesting shapes, or anything where you feel the light would catch the edge of that part of the model, or anything you just want to add a bit of visual interest to. Now, for the weapons and those sort of grey belt accents I wanted to add, we want to darken those down, but I want to be pretty heavy-handed with it, so I'm going to take some of that grim black speed paint and apply that as an all-over wash, or just as a normal speed paint to tone down that grey into something closer to a gunmetal black that is visually distinct from the other black components on the Mini. Right, next thing we want to do is start doing some highlights on the weapons now that it's been toned down with that speed paint. and you've allowed it to dry. That's very important. We can now start doing some rough highlighting on the weapons and the belts. Again, aiming for that sort of 1/4 coverage, although you can afford to be a little bit chunkier on these weapons. They've got quite forgiving shapes to highlight. And you want to try to get a nice little sheen on those upper edges if you can. Right, next thing we want to do is put a fine edge highlight over the grey highlights previously done. I'll be using uniform grey for this. Little tip here is being very gentle with your brush. The more firmly you're applying pressure through those bristles, the more likely it is to dump a lot of paint out, giving you a really thick line. If you're nice and gentle, you can keep those lines a lot thinner, neater, and more refined. And around the leg, and around some of the other armor plates. There's quite a thick line and really obvious delineation between the highlighting layers. So what I'm going to be doing is taking through layers of Eshin Grey, matte black, water them down to a very, very thin glaze consistency, aiming to have very, very little coverage from these paints, and then working back and forth to help blend out the transitions and giving it a nice smooth shine look. I want this to look less like armor plates and more like a rubbery neoprene finish. What we want to do is take that mahogany colour here from Vallejo, so it's already quite a thin translucent paint. It's meant to be run through an airbrush. We can take that and use it almost like a wash of speed paint just to help tone in that leather. It will pull a little bit in the cracks and recesses, but we mostly want it to be used as like a hint, so that we come through with an earth, we can highlight up and have that sort of worn old leather look. And once we've done a little bit of applying this fine edge highlight across the leather pouch, we can come back in with that mahogany again and start to tone that and earth into that underlying leather color. We just need to thin it down maybe with a little bit more water, and it's going to work like a lovely little glaze to help tie all those browns together. And make sure it looks like one cohesive aged leather material. And with the leather done, the bulk of the work on this mini is finished. The only thing left to work is the visor. So that's already been blacked in. I'm then going to take some matte white, thin it down so it's going to run off my brush nice and smoothly, and just dot in some like visor details. It doesn't need to be too specific, but I kind of want to have more than just a light shine off it, so that when I come back through with that glory glow, it looks like there is some like magenta text or something scrolling across the visor screen from the outside. We want to go through and make sure that it's a nice visually interesting look, and if you need to refine it, go through a couple of times. Last thing is we need to base our minis. So I'm going to go for a nice simple green grass, chucking on some PVA glue, layering it up nice and evenly covered, and then sprinkling on some flock. I'm just using some of the Army Painter summer grass. Just sprinkle it on nice and even, tap off the excess, and then black in the rim, and you've got a finished mini ready to go. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around to the end. I really appreciate the support so far. Look, we've got a couple of projects coming up in the near future which are going to be maybe a little bit different. a little bit fun, a little outside our normal, what we've done so far. And we're always looking to improve what we're doing here at the channel. So if you've got any suggestions as to what we might want to paint next, or anything you think we might better do that would help keep you guys engaged, let us know. But until then, I'll catch you guys around.